Please make sure to subscribe our channel and press the bell icon to get notified about our future videos. Question 1. Your on-premises network and Azure subscription are connected via a site-to-site VPN. You have an Azure Storage account named Storage1 with a file share named Share1. You are configuring a private endpoint for Storage1. You need to ensure that the DNS name of Storage1 will be resolvable to its private IP address from the on-premises network. The solution must minimize the effort of maintaining updates in case of private endpoint changes. What should you configure? Select only one answer. Our options are A. A DNS forwarder and an Azure private DNS zone group. B. An Azure private DNS zone group linked to a virtual network. C. An on-premises forward lookup zone. Or D. An on-premises reverse lookup zone. The correct option is a DNS forwarder and an Azure private DNS zone group. A private DNS zone group creates an association between the private endpoint and the zone, so if the endpoint is deleted, it will remove it from DNS. A forward lookup zone will work but needs to be updated manually for new endpoints or removals. A private DNS zone group will only work for Azure virtual machines. Question 2. You have an Azure standard load balancer and an Azure private link service. You share the private link service ID with a customer. You need to complete the configuration for the customer to access the load balancer over private link service. Which two actions should you perform? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Select all answers that apply. The correct options are A and B, that is, approve the private endpoint request and create a private endpoint with the private link service ID in the customer's subscription. Once the private link service is created, the customer must create the private endpoint in their subscription. Then you must approve the private link request from your subscription to enable connectivity to the load balancer. The service endpoint is unrelated to private link and private endpoints. You do not need to create another private link service, and the private endpoint needs to be in the customer's subscription. Question 3. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual network. You plan to deploy an Azure VPN Gateway and 90 site-to-site VPN connections. The solution must meet the following requirements. Ensure that the site-to-site VPN connections remain available if an Azure data center fails. Minimize costs. Which gateway SKU should you specify? Our options are VPN GW1AZ, B. VPN GW2AZ, C. VPN GW4AZ, or D. VPN GW5AZ. The correct option is C. VPN GW4AZ. Basic SKU supports max 10 S2S connections. SKUs 1, 2 and 3 support max 30 S2S connections. SKUs 4 and 5 support max 100 S2S connections. Of those two, SKU 4 minimizes the cost. Question 4. You have an Azure Storage account named Storage1 with locally redundant storage and contains the following resources. You need to add private endpoints for all the Storage1 resources. What is the minimum number of private endpoints that you should add? Select only one answer. Our options are A1, B2, C3 or D4. The correct option is C3. A private endpoint is a network interface that uses a private IP address from a virtual network. This network interface connects privately and securely to a service that is powered by using Azure Private Link. When creating a private endpoint or a storage account, you have the following target sub-resources available: blob, table, queue, file, web, and DFS. The sub-resources for cont1 is blob, for share1 and share2, the sub-resources is file, and for Q1, The subresource is Q. The subresources allow access to only the resources of their respective type, and one private endpoint allows access to all the resources of the selected type. Because storage 1 stores resource of 3 types, you must create at least 3 private endpoints. Question 5. You have an Azure Virtual Network that contains the following service endpoints: Microsoft Azure Active Directory, Microsoft Key Vault, Microsoft Storage, and Microsoft Web. You plan to create a service endpoint policy named Policy 1. You need to use Policy 1 with a service endpoint. With which service endpoint can you use Policy 1? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Microsoft Azure Active Directory, B. Microsoft Key Vault, C. Microsoft Storage, or D. Microsoft Web. The correct option is C. Microsoft Storage. When you are creating service endpoint policies, you can select only the Microsoft Storage service. A service endpoint policy for other types of service endpoints does not exist and cannot be created. Question 6. You have 10 on-premises network that are connected by using a third-party software-defined wide area network. Solution. You have an Azure subscription that contains 5 virtual networks. You plan to connect the Azure Virtual Networks and the on-premises networks by using an Azure Virtual Wide Area Network with a single Virtual WAN hub. You need to ensure that the Azure Virtual WAN can act as a node in the third-party SD-WAN solution. What should you include in the solution? Our options are A. An Azure Virtual WAN Express Route Gateway, B. A Network Virtual Appliance, C. A Site-to-Site Gateway, D. A Point-to-Site Gateway. The correct option is B. A Network Virtual Appliance. Question 7. You are planning the IP addressing for the subnets in Azure Virtual Networks. Which type of resource requires IP addresses in the subnets? Our options are A. Internal load balancers, B. Storage account, C. Azure Virtual Networks NAT, or D. Service endpoint policies. The correct option is A. Internal load balancers. Question 8. Your company has 4 branch offices and an Azure subscription. The subscription contains an Azure VPN Gateway named GW1. The branch offices are configured as shown in the following table. The branch office routers provide internet connectivity and site-to-site VPN connections to GW1. The users in branch 1 report that they can connect to internet resources but cannot access Azure resources. We need to ensure that the branch 1 users can connect to the Azure resources. The solution must meet the following requirements: minimize downtime for all users, minimize administrative effort. What should you do first? Our options are A. Recreate LNG1, B. Reset RTR1, C. Reset connection 1, or D. Reset GW1. The correct option is C. Reset connection 1. The VPN gateway is not the problem. Branch 2, 3 and 4 are still working. Reset the connection. Question 9. You have an Azure subscription that contains 2 virtual networks named VNet1 and VNet2 and the following resources: NIC1, network interface connected to a virtual machine in the East US Azure region; NIC2, network interface connected to a virtual machine in the East US2 Azure region; Subnet 1, subnet associated with VNet1 in the East US region; Subnet 2, subnet associated with VNet2 in the East US2 region. You plan to configure a network security group named NSG1 in the East US region. To which resources can you associate NSG1? Select only one answer. Our options are A. NIC1 and NIC2 only, B. NIC1, NIC2, Subnet 1 and Subnet 2, C. Subnet 1 and NIC1 only, or D. Subnet 2 and NIC2 only. The correct option is C. Subnet 1 and NIC1 only. NSGs can be associated with both network interfaces and subnets. They just must be in the same region. Question 10. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual network named VNet1. VNet1 contains a subnet named Subnet1. A network security group named NSG1 is associated with Subnet1. The subscription contains 25 storage accounts. You plan to create an NSG rule named Rule1 that will block traffic to all the storage accounts. You need to reference all the public IP addresses of the storage accounts to Rule 1. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you use? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Application security groups, B. Microsoft peering, C. Service endpoints, or D. Service tags. The correct option is D. Service tags. Service tags are used to identify groups of public IP addresses for Azure resources. Application security groups are a way to tag a set of virtual machines or resources on a virtual network to be used in an NSG rule. Microsoft peering is used to connect an on-premises network to Azure public resources. A service endpoint is used to connect resources on a virtual network to a public Azure resource over the Microsoft backbone. Question 11. You have an Azure subscription that contains the resources shown in the following table. You plan to deploy an Azure Virtual Network NAT gateway named Gateway 1. The solution must meet the following requirements. VM1 will access the internet by using its public IP address. VM2 will access the internet by using its public IP address. Administrative effort must be minimized. You need to ensure that you can deploy Gateway 1 to VNet 1. What is the minimum number of subnets required on VNet 1? Our options are A2, B3, C4, or D5. The correct option is C4. First is the gateway subnet, second is subnet 2, third is subnet 1 with basic SKU for public IP, and the fourth is NAT gateway required in VNet 1, and hence the correct answer is 4. Otherwise, you could have used subnet 2 to avoid creating fourth subnet. Requirement is to create NAT gateway in VNet 1, so you need fourth subnet. Question 12. You have a network security group assigned to a subnet that contains 3 virtual machines named VM1, VM2, and VM3. VM1 and VM2 receive traffic as planned. However, VM3 does not receive traffic on the same ports as VM1 and VM2. You suspect that the traffic is blocked. You need to use Azure Network Watcher to determine whether traffic to VM3 is blocked. What should you use to diagnose the issue? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Effective security rules, B. NSG diagnostics, C. Next hop, or D. Packet capture. The correct option is A. Effective security rules. Effective security rules show all the NSGs associated with the virtual machines and the network interfaces. This tool shows the NSGs that are in the flow of the traffic and blocks traffic flow. Question 13. You have an Azure Virtual Network named VNet 1 that hosts an Azure Firewall named FW1 and 150 virtual machines. VNet 1 is linked to a private DNS zone named contoso.com. All the virtual machines have their name registered in the contoso.com zone. VNet 1 connects to an on-premises data center by using Express Route. You need to ensure that on-premises DNS servers can resolve the names in the contoso.com zone. Which 2 actions should you perform? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. The correct options are C and D, that is, for FW1, enable DNS proxy, and on the on-premises DNS servers, configure forwarders that point to the front-end IP address of FW1. DNS proxy configuration requires 3 steps. Enable DNS proxy in Azure Firewall DNS settings. Optionally configure your custom DNS server or use the provided default. Finally, you must configure the Azure Firewall's private IP address as a custom DNS server in your virtual network DNS server settings. This ensures DNS traffic is directed to Azure Firewall. Question 14. Hotspot. You have an Azure subscription. You have the on-premises sites shown in the following table. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual WAN. You are evaluating Virtual WAN Basic and Virtual WAN Standard. Which type of Virtual WAN can you use for each site? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, Virtual WAN Basic. Our options are Site 2 only, Site 3 only, Site 2 and Site 3 only, Site 1, Site 2 and Site 3. The correct option is Site 2 only. To the next statement, Virtual WAN Standard. Our options are Site 1 only, Site 1 and Site 3 only, Site 2 and Site 3 only, or Site 1, Site 2 and Site 3. The correct option is Site 1, Site 2 and Site 3. Question 15. Hotspot. You are planning an Azure solution that will contain the following types of resources in a single Azure region: Virtual Machine, Azure App Service, Virtual Network Gateway, Azure SQL Managed Instance. App Service and SQL Managed Instance will be delegated to create resources in virtual networks. You need to identify how many virtual networks and subnets are required for the solution. The solution must minimize costs to transfer data between virtual networks. What should you identify? To answer, select the appropriate option in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, virtual networks. Our options are 1, 2, 3 or 4. The correct option is 1. To the next statement, subnets. Our options are 1, 2, 3 or 4. The correct option is 4. Question 16. Hotspot. You have the Azure resources shown in the following table. Web App 1 uses the standard pricing tier. You need to ensure that Web App 1 can access the virtual machines deployed to VNet 1 or Subnet 1 and VNet 2 or Subnet 2. The solution must minimize costs. What should you create in each virtual network? To answer, select the appropriate option in the answer area. To the answer area, VNet 1. Our options are an additional subnet, a peering connection, a private endpoint, a VPN gateway. The correct option is an additional subnet. To the next statement, VNet 2. Our options are an additional subnet, a peering connection, a private endpoint, or a VPN gateway. The correct option is a VPN gateway. About box 1. Regional virtual network integration. When you connect two virtual networks in the same region, you must have a dedicated subnet in the virtual network you are integrating with. About box 2. Gateway required virtual network integration. When you connect directly to virtual networks in other regions or to a classic virtual network in the same region, you need an Azure Virtual Network Gateway created in the target virtual network. Note, if your app is in an app service environment, it is already in a virtual network and doesn't require use of the VNet integration feature to reach resources in the same virtual network. Question 17. You have an application named App1 that listens for incoming requests on a pre-configured group of 50 TCP ports and UDP ports. You install App1 on 10 Azure virtual machines. You need to implement load balancing for App1 across all the virtual machines. The solution must minimize the number of load balancing rules. What should you include in the solution? Our options are A. Azure Application Gateway v2 that has multiple listeners, B. Azure Standard Load Balancer that has floating IP enabled, C. Azure Standard Load Balancer that has high availability ports enabled, or D. Azure Application Gateway v2 that has multiple site hosting enabled. The correct option is C, Azure Standard Load Balancer that has high availability ports enabled. App 1 is installed on 10 virtual machines which can be put in a backend pool. The requirement is to minimize the number of load balancing rules. If you select HA, it will allow you to have one rule for TCP and UDP ports. If you don't select HA, you will need to have a minimum of 2 rules for TCP and UDP with a asterisk range. Question 18. Drag drop. You have 3 on-premises sites. Each site has a third-party VPN device. You have an Azure Virtual WAN named vWAN1 that has a hub named Hub1. Hub1 connects 2 of 3 on-premises sites by using a site-to-site VPN connection. You need to connect the third site to the other 2 sites by using Hub1. Which 4 actions should you perform in sequence? To answer, move the appropriate actions from the list of actions to the answer area and arrange them in the correct order. The actions provided to us are: download the VPN configuration file from vWAN1, in a Hub1, create a VPN gateway, in a Hub1, create a VPN site, in a Hub1, create a connection to the VPN site, or configure the VPN service. The correct options in the right sequence are: in a Hub1, create a VPN site, in a Hub1, create a connection to the VPN site, download the VPN configuration file from vWAN1, and configure the VPN device. Question 19. You have an Azure subscription. You plan to deploy Azure Firewall to support the following features: threat intelligence based filtering, application level FQDN filtering, web content filtering. You need to recommend an Azure Firewall SKU for the deployment. The solution must minimize cost. What should you recommend? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Azure Firewall Basic, B. Azure Firewall Premium, or C. Azure Firewall Standard. The correct option is C. Azure Firewall Standard. Azure Firewall Basic only supports application level FQDN filtering. Azure Firewall Premium supports all the features but does not minimize costs. Question 20. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual network named VNet1 and an Azure Firewall named FW1. VNet1 is associated with 50 virtual machines that use a user-defined route directed to FW1. You'll discover that Windows Update is failing on the virtual machines. You need to create an application rule for FW1. The solution must minimize administrative effort. Which type of application rule should you create? Select only one answer. Our options are A. FQDN rule, B. FQDN tag, C. IP rule, or D. service tag. The correct option is B. FQDN tag. Though possible with an IP rule and an FQDN rule, it will be difficult to look up all of the URLs and IP addresses needed to manually create the rule. The easiest method is to select the Windows Update FQDN tag. Question 21. You have an Azure subscription that contains a web application firewall named WAF1. WAF1 protects a web app. You need to block traffic from any user agent that does not contain quote-unquote EDG for only the /media/asterisk path. What should you configure? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Bot protection rule set, B. Global WAF policy, C. Per site WAF policy, D. Per URI policy. The correct option is D. Per URI policy. The preference order is global, per site, per URI. So by setting this rule at the per URI level, it will not affect any other site. Question 22. Your company has a single on-premises data center in Washington, D.C. The East US Azure region has a peering location in Washington, D.C. The company only has Azure resources in the East US region. You need to implement Express Route to support up to 1 Gbps. You must only use Express Route unlimited data plans. The solution must minimize costs. Which type of Express Route circuits should you create? Our options are A. Express Route Local, B. Express Route Direct, C. Express Route Premium, or D. Express Route Standard. The correct option is A. Express Route Local. Question 23. You plan to configure BGP for a site-to-site VPN connection between a data center and Azure. Which two Azure resources should you configure? Each correct answer presents a part of the solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. Our options are A. A virtual network gateway, B. Azure Application Gateway, C. Azure Firewall, D. A local network gateway, or E. Azure Front Door. The correct options are A and D, that is, a virtual network gateway and a local network gateway. The correct answers are A and D. To configure BGP for site-to-site VPN connection between a data center and Azure, you will need to configure a virtual network gateway and a local network gateway. The virtual network gateway will be used to establish the VPN connection between your data center and Azure, and the local network gateway will be used to define the on-premises network that you want to connect to Azure. Azure Application Gateway, Azure Firewall, and Azure Front Door are not relevant to this scenario because they are not used for configuring BGP for a site-to-site VPN connection. Question 24. You failed to establish a site-to-site VPN connection between your company's main office and an Azure virtual network. You need to troubleshoot what prevents you from establishing the IPsec tunnel. Which diagnostic log should you review? Our options are A. IKE diagnostic log, B. Root diagnostic log, C. Gateway diagnostic log, or D. Tunnel diagnostic log. The correct option is A. IKE diagnostic log. The IKE diagnostic log table offers verbose debug logging for IKE/IPsec. This is very useful to review when troubleshooting disconnections or failure to connect VPN scenarios. Question 25. You are planning an Azure point-to-site VPN that will use OpenVPN. Users will authenticate by an on-premises Active Directory domain. Which additional service should you deploy to support the VPN authentication? Our options are A. An Azure Key Vault, B. A Radius server, C. A certification authority, or D. Azure Active Directory application proxy. The correct options are B. A Radius server. AD domain authentication allows users to connect to Azure using their organization domain credentials. It requires a Radius server that integrates with the AD server. Question 26. You have an Azure Virtual Network and an on-premises data center. You are planning a site-to-site VPN connection between the data center and the virtual network. Which two resources should you include in your plan? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. Our options are A. A user-defined route, B. A virtual network gateway, C. Azure Firewall, D. Azure Web Application Firewall, E. An on-premises data gateway, F. An Azure Application Gateway, or G. A local network gateway. The correct options are B and G, that is a virtual network gateway and a local network gateway. Question 27. Hotspot. You need to connect an on-premises network and an Azure environment. The solution must use Express Route and support failing over to a site-to-site VPN connection if there is an Express Route failure. What should you configure? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, routing type. Our options are policy-based, route-based, static routing. The correct option is route-based. To the next statement, number of virtual network gateways. Our options are 1, 2, 3. The correct option is 2. Route-based and 2 virtual network gateways. One for Express Route connection and the second for the VPN connection. Question 28. Your company has offices in New York and Amsterdam. The company has an Azure subscription. Both offices connect to Azure by using a site-to-site VPN connection. The office in Amsterdam uses resources in the North Europe Azure region. The office in New York uses resources in the East US Azure region. You need to implement Express Route circuits to connect each office to the nearest Azure region. Once the Express Route circuits are connected, the on-premises computers in the Amsterdam office must be able to connect to the on-premises servers in the New York office by using the Express Route circuits. Which Express Route option should you use? Our options are A. Express Route Fast Path, B. Express Route Global Reach, C. Express Route Direct, or D. Express Route Local. The correct option is B. Express Route Global Reach. Express Route Global Reach provides the ability to connect multiple Azure regions and on-premises locations with a single Express Route circuit. In this scenario, you need to connect the Amsterdam office to the North Europe Azure region and the New York office to the East US Azure region. Express Route Global Reach enables the communication between the on-premises computers in the Amsterdam office and the on-premises servers in the New York office through the Express Route circuits. Hence, Express Route Global Reach is the most suitable option to use in this scenario. Question 29. Your company has an on-premises network and 3 Azure subscriptions named Subscription 1, Subscription 2, and Subscription 3. The departments at the company use the Azure subscriptions as shown in the following table. All the resources in the subscription are in either the West US Azure region or the West US 2 Azure region. You plan to connect all the subscriptions to the on-premises network by using Express Route. What is the minimum number of Express Route circuits required? Our options are A1, B2, C3, D4, or E5. The correct option is A1. The circuit owner can share a circuit with up to 10 Azure subscriptions. The circuit owner can view who has been authorized to the circuit. The owner can revoke the authorization at any time. Question 30. You have an Azure subscription. You deploy a Web Application Firewall as part of the Content Delivery Network implementation project. You need to configure the WAF to ensure that the CDN content is only served based on geographical location. What should you do? Select only one answer. Our options are A. Create a custom rule, B. Enable a managed rule, C. Deploy a load balancer to allow access, or D. Deploy an Azure firewall with rules to block access. The correct option is A. Create a custom rule. A WAF custom rule provides geographic-based access controls. Question 31. You are planning an Azure deployment that will contain 3 virtual networks in the East US Azure region as shown in the following table. A site-to-site VPN will connect VNet 1 to your company's on-premises network. You need to recommend a solution that ensures that the virtual machines on all the virtual networks can communicate with the on-premises network. The solution must minimize costs. What should you recommend for VNet 2 and VNet 3? Our options are A. VNet to VNet VPN connections, B. Peering, C. Service endpoints, or D. Route tables. The correct option is B. Peering. Question 32. The company has an Azure subscription that contains the virtual networks shown in the following table. You need to connect the virtual networks to the office by using Express Route. The solution must meet the following requirements. The connection must have up to 1 Gbps of bandwidth. The office must have access to all the virtual networks. Costs must be minimized. How many Express Route circuits should be provisioned? And which Express Route SKU should you enable? Our options are A. 1 Express Route Premium Circuit, B. 2 Express Route Premium Circuits, C. 4 Express Route Standard Circuits, or D. 1 Express Route Standard Circuit. The correct option is A. 1 Express Route Premium Circuit. Question 33. You have an Azure subscription that contains the resources shown in the following table. You create a virtual network named VNet2 in the West US region. You plan to enable peering between VNet1 and VNet2. You need to ensure that the virtual machines connected to VNet2 can connect to VM1 and VM2 via LB1. What should you do? Our options are A. From the peering settings of VNet2, set traffic forwarded from remote virtual network to allow. B. Change the floating IP configurations of LB1. C. From the peering settings of VNet1, set traffic forwarded from remote virtual network to allow. Or D. Change the SKU of LB1. The correct option is D. Change the SKU of LB1. Question 34. Hotspot. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual network gateway named VNet GWY1. VNet GWY1 has a public IP address of 20.25.32.214. You need to query the health probe of VNet GWY1. How should you complete the URI? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, dash, column, / 20.25.32.214. Our options are HTTP, HTTPS, SNMP. The correct option is HTTPS. Moving forward, column, dash, / health probe. Our options are 80, 443, 8081. The correct option is 8081. Question 35. Hotspot. You have an on-premises data center. You have an Azure subscription that contains 10 virtual machines and a virtual network named VNet1 in the East US Azure region. The virtual machines are connected to VNet1 and replicate across 3 availability zones. You need to connect the data center to VNet1 by using Express Route. The solution must meet the following requirements. Maintain connectivity to the virtual machines if 2 availability zones fail. Support 1000 Mbps connections. Minimize costs. What should you include in the solution? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. To the answer area, minimum number of Express Route circuits. These are our options. The correct options are 1 Express Route standard circuit. To the next statement, minimum number of Express Route gateways. The correct option is 1 Express Route gateway of the ERGW1AZ SKU. Question 36. You have an Azure subscription that contains a virtual network named VNet1 and the virtual machines shown in the following table. All the virtual machines are connected to VNet1. You need to ensure that the application hosted on the virtual machines can be accessed from the internet. The solution must ensure that virtual machines share a single public IP address. What should you use? Our options are A. An internal load balancer, B. Azure Application Gateway, C. A NAT gateway, or D. A public load balancer. The correct option is D. A public load balancer. Question 37. You have 3 on-premises networks. You have an Azure subscription that contains a basic Azure Virtual WAN. The Virtual WAN contains a single virtual hub and a virtual network gateway that is limited to a throughput of 1 Gbps. The on-premises networks connect to the virtual WAN by using site-to-site VPN connections. You need to increase the throughput of the virtual WAN to 3 Gbps. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you do? Our options are A. Upgrade the virtual WAN to the standard SKU, B. Add an additional VPN gateway to the Azure subscription, C. create an additional virtual hub, or D, increase the number of gateway scale units? The correct option is D, increase the number of gateway scale units. As we want to minimize administrative effort, increase the number of scale units. Question 38. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Network. You need to design the subnets. Which three types of resources require a dedicated subnet? Each correct answer presents a complete solution. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. Our options are A. Azure Bastion, B. Azure Active Directory Domain Services, C. Azure Private Link, D. Azure Application Gateway V2, or E. VPN Gateway. The correct options are A, D, and E, that is Azure Bastion, Azure Application Gateway V2, and VPN Gateway. All gateway types and Bastion must have dedicated subnets. Question 39. Hotspot. You have an Azure subscription. You plan to use Azure Virtual WAN. You need to deploy a virtual WAN hub that meets the following requirements. Supports 4 Gbps of site-to-site VPN traffic. Supports 8 Gbps of Express Route traffic. Minimizes costs. How many scale units should you configure? To answer, select the appropriate option in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, for the S2S VPN gateway, our options are 2, 4, 8, 16. The correct option is 8. To the next statement, for the Express Route gateway, our options are 2, 4, 8, 16. The correct option is 4. Question 40. Hotspot. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual WAN. You need to deploy a virtual WAN hub that meets the following requirements. Supports 10 sites that will connect to the virtual WAN. Supports 10 sites that will connect to the virtual WAN hub by using a site-to-site VPN connection. Supports 8 Gbps of Express Route traffic. Minimizes costs. What should you configure? To answer, select the appropriate options in the answer area. Note, each correct selection is worth 1 point. To the answer area, virtual WAN type. Our options are basic, standard. The correct option is standard. To the next statement, number of scale units. Our options are 2, 4, 6, 8. The correct option is 4.